Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live to the public, and for those not able to watch live, the webcast is being recorded and will be made available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. So it brings us on to item 1 on the agenda, which is the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 10th of June 2024. I move that these are taken as read, confirmed as signed. Is everyone with that? Thank you. Item 2 is question time. I've not been advised of any questions from the public. So item 3 is questions asked by members of the public, members of the committee under Standing Order 7. I've not received any such questions. Item 4 is urgent items. We've not received any urgent items. So item 5 next is declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest they wish to declare? No. Okay, so item 6 is declarations of the party whip. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? No. So item 7 is petitions, and we've not received any petitions, which moves us on to the first substantive item, which is item 8, the medium-term financial strategy, budget monitoring and MTFS refresh. A supplementary report was circulated to members on Friday, 30th of August, and also published on the County Council's website, and that's the main report we'll be looking at today. Declan Keegan, the Director of Corporate Resources, is introducing the report and is joined by Simone Hines, Assistant Director, and we're also joined by the lead member for Resources, Mr. Brecken. So welcome all, and Declan, please go ahead. Thank you.
I'll pass over to Simone if that's okay, on the basis she's done all the work. So.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. So I'll just give a brief introduction to the report and highlight some key issues. So the report does give an update on both the current year revenue and capital position, so that's for 24-25, and then a very high level overview of the current MTFS position, but that is still very much a work in progress, as you'll see from the report. So just in terms of those key issues, so the overall revenue position, that's based on kind of trends at the end of July, then forecast forward to the end of the year, is forecast to be on budget. And you can see that in the table at paragraph 16 of the report. There are a number of variances, though, at service level, and some quite significant variances that I just wanted to touch on. Particularly around social care, there's quite a mixed picture so far this year. So you can see from the report that children's social care continues to be a concern, and there is still rising demand so far this year, and a forecast £9 million overspend. A lot of that is being driven by increased residential placement numbers, although, as you'll see from the report, there are some signs that the weekly cost of those placements is starting to reduce, so that may be a positive sign for the rest of the year. And then adult social care is showing a reduction in demand and costs actually this year, and that was a trend that actually started towards the end of the previous financial year, and adults is forecasting an underspend of just under 13 million. We're also seeing inflationary pressures easing as we go through the year, so we're not expecting at this stage to need to use all of the inflation budget that we set aside to fund pay and price inflation. Again, it's still relatively early on in the year, though, so things could change, but we forecast based on what we know at the moment. But the combination of all of those changes that you see in the report and those variances at service and corporate level does mean that we're not expecting to need to use the reserves that we thought we would. So when we set the budget in February, there was still a gap, and we were forecasting to use just over £6 million worth of reserves to close that gap. Because of the trends we're seeing so far, we don't think that's going to be needed now. So that's the revenue position, but there are a number of capital pressures that you'll see later on in the report, and they come both from increased costs from one scheme in particular, but also some risks around future funding, and we've taken some more prudent assumptions about some future funding. So to ensure that we've got cover to meet some of those pressures, we have assumed an additional allowance of just over 6 million from the revenue underspend to put toward capital pressures this year and in future years. And there is further information on what those pressures are later in the report. And then just moving on to mention the high needs deficit, which we have talked about quite a bit before, but that also continues to be quite a significant concern for the council. We are forecasting a deficit on the high needs spend of about 23 million this year. Now, we did budget a deficit, and we have been budgeting a deficit on high needs for many years, but the budgeted deficit was 17 million. So we are sort of in a worse position on high needs than we expected to be. We are doing some more work just to understand what's causing that, but we do believe at this stage it's increased demand. If that continues, the cumulative deficit on high needs will stand at about 64 million by the end of this financial year. And clearly, clarity on SEND reform and a solution for that deficit is going to be really critical for the council's MTFS in the future. And then just looking ahead at that MTFS position, sort of longer term, we are refreshing that at the moment. So we're looking at all of the assumptions that underpin the MTFS, the growth assumptions, inflation, and progress with savings as well. We're aiming to have that completed by the end of September. But based on current trends, and obviously this is subject to change, but based on what we know at the moment, we are still expecting the long-term gap in the MTFS to be in the region of 100 million over the next 4 years. And then the high needs deficit that I've just mentioned would be in addition to that as well. So we've got a forecast deficit in terms of the council's core revenue position, and then that high needs deficit as well. So still some considerable financial challenges for the council to deal with. And that is going to be driven largely from social care demand, as we've been seeing. I think the other uncertainty is around pay, both sort of the council's paywall position and government policy on the national living wage as well is quite a significant driver of the council's cost base. And as you'll see in the report, there are some capital pressures that I've already mentioned. And then probably finally, really, it's just the flag that there is a greater level of uncertainty than usual because of the new government and not having clarity yet on what new government policies or funding priorities might be. And as we're well aware, there's a Chancellor's budget announcement on the 30th of October. So we're expecting that to provide some further details in terms of what the future of local government funding might be. Although often those budget announcements may give very high level priorities and overall funding totals, it may be that it's a local government finance settlement in December that gives us the information that we need. So there could be a longer period of uncertainty through to Christmas really for us in setting that MTFS and budget position for next year. I'll leave the introduction there, but obviously happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. Does any members have any questions or comments on that part of the report? No? Oh, sorry, Max.
Would you like to say anything about Appendix E, which is, the prospective savings?
Just bear with me 1 second. Was there any particular queries on that appendix?
Well,
or
you've ranked them on a rank basis, and I just wondered whether you've got confidence in the Greens and whether there are any risks in the others that we ought to note.
So in terms of that appendix, that gives an update on our savings under development. So these are savings that aren't yet included in the MTFS because we are still working on bringing them forward. So that they're not savings yet where we've got in some of them that there is an estimated saving, but we've not got the appropriate level of assurance yet to bring them through into the MTFS. What we've tried to do in this appendix is rate the assurance we've got so far on whether they're deliverable and how complex they might be. So those that we've rated green, we've got a reasonable assurance that they are deliverable and that we can build savings into the MTFS in the future. Those that are amber are where we may not have all the information we need yet. There may not be a time scale that we're sort of clear on, or there may be some political decisions we still need to make on those. So we've just tried to rate them to be helpful for the committee to understand where we might be with those savings. But by their nature, all of the savings under development are not yet in the MTFS because we still need to do more work on those anyway. That helps.
Thanks.
I think if I could just add to what Simone said, I mean, Nick Rushton has always said the low-hanging fruit has been picked, and I think we have done that. I think now as you look at moving forward, I mean, we've been very prudent as an authority with the savings we made, but savings under development, I mean, I think the RAG system when I saw this report and obviously the update on it, it is frightening that I think only sort of 11 out of the 60 odd that we've got there are green, and we're confident with the information that we've got that they will be delivered. But it is getting tighter, and I think that 100 million figure at the end of the 4-year term, if we add the additional year on there, is of concern. So I think the budget will answer a lot of questions that we're asking probably, and people are asking from the new government. We need to then take a view of it. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hunt, did you want to come back, or no? Mrs. Patledge and Mr. Golden, finally.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So I just wondered whether, in the light of the worsening situation, are there any further in-year actions being considered this year rather than addressing it through the budget? So in the past, we've put vacancy controls in and authorisations on expenditure at a high level by officers. And then second, on the special educational needs block, we're in this programme, aren't we, with the DFE now? Can you say whether that is producing any proposals from them or suggestions about how to deal with the deficit? And I think you said there was 2 programmes. There's one that's kind of we're in, but there's a higher level one for authorities that are in a even more difficult position than us. Can you say, how bad would it need to get if it's 64 million now? How bad would it need to get before we went into asked to go into the higher programme? Thank you.
Just in terms of that first question, we do still have escalated financial controls in place. So we brought them in last December. Excuse me, they are still in place. There is reference to them in the report that just summarises what those controls are. So we still have recruitment controls in place, for instance. We still have the procurement board operating, and I think that will become a permanent feature anyway, actually, just as part of our overall governance procedures. And we've got some controls around non-essential spend, which did generate some savings towards the end of last year. So we are leaving those in place. We're keeping them under review, but given that the MTFS position, even though the current year position is being managed because we've got that eye on the longer term, medium term position, we are leaving those financial controls in place. In terms of the point around the high needs, there are 2 elements. There's a delivering best value scheme, which the council's part of, and then there's a safety valve scheme, which is the next level up. But I'll let Declan answer that part.
So in terms of the first, when we're seeing the delivering best value sort of scheme, that tends to be government give you £1 million to sort of do diagnostic work and other investigations, and they also you get regular catch-ups where you do submissions and sort of talk with you. It's probably fair to say that the onus is still left locally. So we took £1 million and supplemented it quite heavily to sort of do the work with sort of Newton to sort of really try and drive a lot of the sort of how we assess packages, how we sort of work with inclusion with schools and things like that. But in terms of, I think your question was about what do we get from sort of DBV, it does tend to be more that kind of a point of contact and then monitoring us as opposed to necessarily a flow of information through. What I would say is, though, it does appear that they are starting to take some of that intelligence that they're gathering from authorities and do something with it. I don't know whether you picked up on the Ofsted announcement yesterday. It was mainly about sort of the dropping of the single word assessments, but beneath that there was quite a bit about inclusion, and that is one of the things the sector's been sort of pushing for. That if Ofsted were going in, they weren't really judging schools on inclusion. So in fairness to the schools, actually, when they've got that dilemma about how you deal with sort of pupils, they're just following the inspection regime. Hopefully now that's going to get sort of flipped on its head a bit, and there's going to be that encouragement for schools to take it in. So I think probably to summarise what's saying, short term we haven't had much in terms of ideas coming through, but hopefully we are starting to see the sort of an acceptance that there just needs to be a reform of the system, which is really positive. The second bit about moving into safety valve. They seem to do it on your relative size of your budget, so it skews it towards almost sort of, I suppose, the smaller authorities. So we're probably a couple of years off, to be honest. There isn't a hard and fast measure, but if you look at I think it was Dorset went into it, they were at 100 million deficit. So you can see that it's that's what I sort of a couple of years away. So I think that the reality is that it's going to have to be reformed with the system as opposed to these sort of programs that are going to sort of solve these deficits.
Thank you, Mrs.
Thank you all for a very comprehensive report, as always, and most of my questions have really been answered. But what I'd like to know it is, with the budget pending in October and the spending review, is there any likelihood that we can have a briefing or a workshop on the effects of the budget onto our MTFS? Because our next meeting is on the 6th of November. So, how can we, suggestions from you to see how we can plan that, so we know what the impacts are and how we can deal with them and alleviate or, deal with the shock.
We can absolutely plan an all-member briefing. First of all, if that would help keep all members up to date. We do also have an MTFS training session already in the diary, I think, for November. So we could also use that to again update members on the announcements from the budget. I mean, if there are any announcements that have a significant impact on the financial position that we weren't necessarily expecting, or we don't think we could manage, or we'll need some quick decisions, then we'd need to bring something forward, probably through Cabinet and Scrutiny on that anyway. So I think some of it will depend on what those announcements are, the impact on us, and how we can manage that. But there's a couple of opportunities to keep members updated.
Yes, as long as we've got something in the diary, that would be great. Thank you very much. And we know the report.
Yeah, no more comments, contributions from anyone? No. Yeah, we move on to the next.
In terms of capital, I wasn't going to go through that in huge detail. I guess a couple of issues just to draw to your attention is the position on the MMDR North scheme, which is covered in the report. There are some mitigations there. We are still having some discussions on how we can bring those costs down further. But the additional contribution to capital pressures that I mentioned earlier on in the introduction will help meet those pressures. The other issue from capital is uncertainty over the Network North and local transport funding, which we had built into the programme. We have now taken that back out because there is quite a lot of uncertainty about whether the new government will continue to prioritise that funding, or whether it may well be used in other ways. But again, we don't yet know that until the end of October. But for the moment, we have chosen to take that funding out. There is some slight positive news on the capital programme, and that the overall deficit on the programme has reduced slightly. It's now just under, I think it's 87 million. It was about 98, I think, in the previous MTFS update. That's because there's been some slight amendments to programmes, and also there's been some earlier repayment of some of our 106 forward funding compared to what we're expecting. So that will release some small savings for the MTFS in future years if we haven't got quite the borrowing need, or we can defer borrowing for a little bit longer. But I think that sort of overall view of the capital programme is there are still a number of pressures, both in terms of existing schemes that have got cost pressures, uncertainties over funding, and we will be applying some quite strict rules in terms of new capital projects, where we'll only be incorporating new projects into the programme if they've got external funding, basically, or other funding sources. So I'm again happy to take questions on the capital programme though, if that's.
Thank you, Simone. Mr. Morgan.
Thank you very much. So there was an article in Times or the FT yesterday about a particular scheme outside of Oxford where Park and Ride had been built, but money had sort of dried up for the access roads to it, and as a result, it was sort of seen as being this sort of horrendous sort of white elephant of a scheme that was half built but not actually usable. Is there a risk that we're going to end up with that with the Melton bypass, on the basis that if work is going to stop because funding is not going to be available, that we're going to end up with a series of half-built roads and roundabouts without any access to them?
Just to provide some assurance on that then, so there is already a contingency within the capital programme to cover. It covers a range of capital schemes, but there is a sort of specific contingency in there for MMDR. That doesn't cover the whole of the forecast overspend though, and we are having still some discussions with the contractor to say, actually, we don't have the required funding for all of this overspend, and therefore we need to look at how we can mitigate costs. What we are doing now, as you'll see in the report, is because of the revenue position in the current year, that has enabled us to set aside some resources for those capital pressures. So a combination of the contingencies that we'd got in the capital programme, as we would do with any capital scheme, and that additional cover for risks will ensure that we can complete the scheme. But we are still wanting to have those discussions with contractors to try and identify some mitigation, so we can reduce those costs further, and therefore that additional funding that we've identified we can use for other pressures, because there are other pressures as well. So, but I can give assurance that we have at the moment identified some resilience towards those pressures.
So just to add to that briefly, obviously when the costs started going up sort of right before the construction started, the scope was looked at, and it's not an easy scheme to change the scope on. So unfortunately, this is one of those projects. Once you've started, you're pretty much committed to it. So it's not, it's not a great position from sort of the finance point of view that you're on this track. But I think probably stopping it or trying to sort of get out contractually cause even bigger problems than we've got at the moment.
Mr. Galton, and then Mr.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just seeking a bit more information about the second half, paragraph 80, where you referred to the Transport Asset Management Fund and the removal of the Network North grant. And then you go on to explain that the Prime Minister announced significant levels of funding for then Prime Minister in 23-24, indicative future year 11-year programme, significant 130 million over 11 years. And that is now in doubt, but we don't know yet. I've got in mind, is that related to the HS2 money, whereby that got cancelled, taking it to Manchester, and the intention was to put all that money, keep it ring fenced within transport, and there'd be significant funding for local government, not just for this, but we were going to be able to use it to support public transport and things like that. Is all that now at risk?
That's correct. That is the funding. There was the BSIP funding, which was the bus improvement grant. Now that was for last year and this year. So we do have that BSIP grant, and we are spending that in line with plans. We then had two allocations in the early years from the Network North cash, as you've quite rightly said. What we then had though was that longer. So there was I think a 7 and then a 10-year funding period for 2 different grants under that Network North funding. So although we think the early years, in terms of, I think it was 23, 24 and 24, 25, we've already received some of that and we're spending it. It's that future years allocation, because it was due to significantly ramp up in later years. So the long-term funding projection was that the later years of the programme we were due to get much higher allocations than those initial 2 years. Because we're not sure what the new government's priorities will be, whether it will still be used in that way, or whether it could still be that it's prioritised for transport, but they could allocate it differently as well. That's the other risk, I think, that it could be allocated differently across the country. We haven't had any formal update as yet, but just to be prudent, given some of the messages around savings needs to be found and the picture of public finances, we feel it's prudent to take that out of the programme at the moment, so that we're not, in order to start spending future years allocations, we would probably need to be doing some planning on that now in terms of preparing procurement processes, for instance, and we don't want to make those commitments and do the work on that until we've got much more certainty about whether that funding is still going to be there and what the allocations might be and how it's going to be allocated.
Just to come back, are you expecting that to be announced in the budget?
We would hope so.
Right.
Yes.
That's probably a single year.
Yeah, that's as Declan's just said, because the government is looking at a multi-year spending review, but that won't be complete until spring of 2025. We think any announcement on the 30th of October and then the settlement sort of around Christmas time may only be for 1 year. So we may not get longer term certainty until next year, until next spring. Perhaps even later than that.
Right, just further it gone down a slightly different route there. So we were told that one thing we were going to get was certainty on longer term settlements for planning. You're now saying we're not going to get that. The government had promised there is 3 year settlements.
There is indications in the Chancellor's announcement that the government are looking at multi-year settlements, but in order to do that there would need to be a spending review. That spending review will be launched at the 30th of October budget announcement. what we've read so far is that the period of that spending review, so the time taken to conduct the spending review, means that it may not complete until the spring of 2025. So once that spending review is complete, I think the intention is then to have multi-year settlements. But just because of the timing, how long that spending review will take, and then the ability of being able to issue settlements to local government in time, which would need to be before Christmas, we think there is likely just to be a 1 year settlement for 25-26 whilst that spending review completes, and then there'll be multi-year settlements from 26-27 onwards. That's what we are understanding from the Fixing the Foundations paper. But again, more clarity will come on the 13th of October, we hope.
Okay. Mr. Frisbee. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Declan. Thank you, Simone. Just coming from Melton Mowbray, I think it would be prudent that I picked up on what my colleague referred to in terms of the MMDR and a simple country folk that we are. It'd be really in Melton Mowbray, speaking on my behalf of my family particularly. Is there any likelihood, no matter how remote, that the MMDR will not link up? I live in Melton. I have to say that the contractors have been very, very sensitive and very professional in the way they've done it. There's no issues with that. But at the moment, Melton Mowbray is a sort of hodgepodge of roundabouts in the middle of fields. And it has caused some disruption. And we have had issues raised by the town estate and other traders that there's been an adversity in their trade this summer because of what's gone on. It would be disastrous in the least if we now are at a stage where we're thinking the whole project might be compromised. Obviously not taking officers to task, but can you offer me at least a modicum of assurance that that section of it will go ahead as promised? Or is there a likelihood, no matter how remote, that it won't link as planned? Thank you, Chair. Thank you, officers.
I mean, for what we know now, that northeastern section is going to get completed. There's nothing, there's no discussions, there's nothing at all that suggests it's not. I know you don't mean this, but I mean you can't predict every sort of black swan event, as it were, that kind of come down the track. But in terms of reasonable scenarios, it's going to go ahead and get finished.
Thank you, Declan. That's satisfactory at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay. So more to add, Simone?
No, nothing further from me. Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you, everyone, for participating in this item, and thank you, Simone, Declan and Mr. Brecken. And we move on to item 9, which is the East Midlands Shared Service Annual Performance Update 2023-2024. Elaine Simpson, head of the East Midlands Shared Services, is presenting the report, and it's on pages 11 to 22 of your paperwork. So over to you, Elaine.
Thank you. So the report details the performance of East Midlands Shared Services for the year 2023-24. East Midlands Shared Services is a centralised back office function providing transactional finance, HR, payroll and IT services with a partnership agreement for Nottingham City Council and Leicestershire County Council. Background of the report explains how that partnership and service provision was created and the strategic plan that underpins those services. The report provides the 2023-2024 financial position, which was an overspend of 0.2%. The detail of how that overspend occurred is detailed within the report, but it was largely due to the timing of a large value invoice that was received after the year-end cut-off, therefore had to be processed in that current year rather than the previous year where it belonged, but the financials do remain very stable. The best value review that was in the pipeline and mentioned in last year's report has been completed for the Finance Shared Service Centre, and we're now looking to benchmark that review against industry standards so that we can provide added confidence that the service provision is value for money and also operates within best practice. As a service provider, continuous improvement is always at the forefront of our focus, so it is important that regular reviews are in place to make sure that we're moving with the times, so to speak, and aim that the service is future-proofed for both councils. We also have daily, weekly, monthly targets to ensure that the performance and the output is in line with the service level agreement, to ensure that any spikes or blockages are identified straight away, and that the service provision remains on track. The Employee Service Centre Best Value Review is due to start at some point later this year. The growth section does focus on the completion of the in-house debt collection project, which has seen an enhanced, improved service provision compared to the outsourced service that was previously in place. This has improved cash flow and root cause analysis, and causing reasons for non-payment, payments not being made on time. We've managed to identify quite a lot of those and fix some of those root cause reasons. The success of that project has led to other debt collection services being awarded to East Midlands Shared Services. Most recently, the LCC Adult Social Care Debt Ledger, which will move from an external provider to the EMS in-house collection service from February 2025. Customer section highlights the customer satisfaction rate and ticket volumes that run through our service, and also outlines the work done with customer boards within the service to improve the customer experience and tackle and identify any issues that there may be in that area. Just a little update following the decision to withdraw from the education sector as a payroll provider. There have been multiple issues with the alternative service provider. Whilst that service is no longer provided by EMS, the County Council is ultimately responsible for any pension issues relating to maintained schools. So therefore a significant amount of time has been spent trying to rectify the issues with that new service provider, and the details of that are also in the report. As a high volume service provider, we have to rely heavily on technology to ensure that the service is as efficient as it can be and remains within the budget restraints. The ESC has focused on stabilising their payroll service following the implementation of Fusion. That's a couple of years ago, and I know that the aftermath of that was widely discussed at the time, but now that service is back in a stable place and has been able to utilise reporting and analytics to enhance their payroll reconciliations, absence reporting, and also the introduction of a new Oracle Recruitment Cloud, which has created a uniform process across all departments for that recruitment process. The latest Oracle health check has been completed and has returned 0 risks. That health check relates to cybersecurity and identifies any related risks in the system. This is benchmarked by CIS, which is the Centre for International Security, who benchmark industry standards and best practice. So that latest health check result is a very positive one for us. You will see a number of other pieces of functionality mentioned in the report that allow us to automate transactions, reduce manual effort, and obviously in turn human error. The details of all of those additional functionalities are also in the report. As part of the partnership agreement, there are some services that are provided by Nottingham and some from Leicester. And whilst there is a question mark over who will be responsible for our internal audit beyond 2025, and we're hoping that that is going to be confirmed at the next joint committee meeting on the 16th of September, the results of the audit are in the report for you to see, but it is also mentioned that, you know, that area is monitored by the Corporate Governance Committee. Summarise all of our existing and pending projects within a table in the report so that you can see the areas of focus across the 3 services, where we're currently at with each of those projects. And then there is a summary of the report that just gives you a short overview of our position as a service overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Mr. Buckley.
Thanks. You mentioned the audit, and the Corporate Governance Committee is indeed looking at it. I mean, John Slater, who's the Nottingham City Council Audit and Assurance Manager, was at our last meeting. At that stage, the 23-24 audit report hadn't been completed. He alluded to problems with staffing and resources and actually recruitment. I believe now the 23-24 audit has been completed, although I haven't seen the full details of that. No doubt we'll get that at the next corporate governance meeting. probably you alluded also that we're still seeking assurance on the 24-25 internal audit. I wrote to Nottingham City Council in June. 2 months later, they've responded and said they're looking at it. And they've referred it to the recently appointed interim head of audit and asked for a mitigation to be developed to give us assurance, and they promised they'll work with us. Certainly listening to the lead on the group assurance and audit, it really wasn't very reassuring. And the fact that it took 2 months to respond to the letter was really disappointing. And even when it came back, basically, all they're saying is, well, we're working on it. So we really do need some more firm reassurance of what actually is going to happen. I full take your point about the 25-26, that's going to be decided in September, but we really do need some substantial reassurance of what's going on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We've asked for the same reassurance from them. So you're right, the 2023-24 audits have been completed, and those outcomes are the outcomes that are outlined in that report that I've provided today. We've been assured that we will get the confirmation about the 25-26 audit at the joint committee meeting on the 16th of September. And obviously we do need that reassurance for future as well. When we did have a meeting with the interim of the head of audit, who said it may not look the same as it normally does. They may have to outsource part of it, but they have assured us that they will complete that next audit come what may. And we're just waiting for the same reassurance on the 16th of September. I don't have any other information for you outside of that, I'm afraid.
Oh, thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Mr. Brecken. Yeah, it was just to add, I mean, obviously Nottingham City Council declared themselves bankrupt, and obviously this is one of their many challenges that they're trying to deal with. But I think the whole of Nottingham City Council, all their operations are not as functional as they should be. But I think we do have assurances that something will be done, and obviously we need to make sure from our point of view that the services that East Midlands Shared Services offer are still delivered, and that's something that we're very aware of. And if need be, when we do attend the joint committees, if that assurance isn't forthcoming, then we'll look at alternatives. But it's good to see that Nottingham City Council, even if they need to outsource, there's a lot of local authorities that offer internal audit services that could be picked up on, and we'll make sure that happens.
Simone, did you want to come?
Yeah, it's just to add to that, really, to say that we are still expecting an update on all of those issues, the 23-24 opinion, the 24-24 audit plan and resources, and progress on sort of beyond that. We are expecting a report to go to Joint Committee on the 16th of September. We'll then be able to update corporate governance at that time as well. We haven't yet seen a draft of the report, and we are chasing for that. I'm hoping that the agenda has to be circulated on Friday, I believe, so we need it in the next couple of days, obviously.
Thank you. Thanks.
Mrs. Page.
Thank you. I think Councillor Barclay and Councillor Brecken covered it, but I think the salient point should also be going forward that those services not only need to be delivered effectively, but on a timescale. And I think a timescale needs to be attached to it, so we don't constantly have to chase through several departments. But a question for me, being a total IT Luddite, it is it is all heavily reliant and Oracle on the IT. So we've been there before with Oracle, etc. So Mastech was employed to do all of the IT work and whatever. So then, as I read, and I think it was a Sure system was introduced. And what I can't see, being an IT Luddite, is how that all fits together, whether that is separate or interlinked. And what I also wonder is how is the effectiveness, because Mastech is being paid separately, if I understand it, on top of the Oracle. So how we measure the effectiveness and the value for money from that. And because just put it together for me to understand that, because we are talking value for money, outcomes and effectiveness. So how does that sit? Thank you.
So the Assure system is connected to the egress system. It's a reporting system that is linked into Oracle that allows the system to pick up people's absence, their pay, any leave, maternity, that kind of thing, and historical patterns of payments. So those payments are run so that we can sense check the payroll before the payroll is run, and it does identify any issues before that payroll is actually run. So it is a very valuable tool in place at the moment. So that is the Assure system. That is separate, yes. So it's a reporting solution that feeds into the Oracle system, yes, and it is separate. And with regards to MasTech, you are right that we have Oracle, who is our actual system, and MasTech, who are our managed support provider. They have very strict SLAs with regards to, how quickly they have to respond to any issues, any tickets. They deal with a number of things outside that Oracle do not deal with. So there will be quarterly updates which run through the system, identify any bugs, correct any issues that are in the system. So they're responsible for doing all the due diligence before and after those updates to make sure nothing in the system is interrupted. They also deal with any issues if the functionality is not working correctly, if anybody's experiencing any problems with in the system, and then any change requests. So if we wanted to utilize functionality that we don't currently have, or we want to develop the system to give us better reporting or different functionality, they will also work with us to develop that and deliver that into the service as well. And that is very heavily managed on a separate contract with SLAs and regular meetings to make sure that they're on track, that they are delivering value for money, and that they are delivering exactly what we've asked them to deliver within that contract.
Okay, Mr. Bannister.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Elaine, for the report. Just seeking a little bit more clarity on the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Health Check, which is noted in paragraph 25 of the report. At the conclusion of that paragraph, you talk that there's reference to a second health check following the work currently being in progress. But during your presentation, you did mention that a health check has been concluded, and that related to the cyber security aspects of which zero risk. Was this the same health check, or was that a separate health check?
It was the second one. So yeah, I kind of got that information after that report had been written, but it is the second one and it has come back with no issues.
I'm grateful for the clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions, comments on this item? No? Okay. Well, thank you, Elaine, for coming and speaking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. And it brings us on to item 10, which is the annual report on the Traded Services Strategy 2023-2024. Richard Hunt, the head of Catering, Hospitality and Country Parks, is presenting the report, supported by the Assistant Director of Corporate Resources, Jane Glasgow. The report on pages 23 to 32 of your paperwork, and when you're ready, Richard.
Good morning, everybody. I'll start with a brief introduction to the paper. Thought it'd be worth sort of beginning by saying the format of this year's paper is slightly different to the format that the Scrutiny Commission has seen in previous years. Following feedback, and particularly after the interim update that we gave to the Commission back in January, we've taken the previous report and the appendix that went with it, and we've merged it into one document. Hopefully this aids clarity for members because now all the pertinent information is included in one document rather than split over two. So just to kind of say you're seeing something slightly different to before, but very similar to what you saw in January. It's also worth noting that because we did the interim update to the Commission in January, which looked forwards from January to the end of the financial year 2023-24, and because this paper looks back at the entirety of 2023-24, albeit it's September of this year, there is inevitably some overlap between those two reports. So we've aimed as much as possible throughout the report to ensure that we really clearly signpost how things that were being drawn to members' attention back in January are reflected within this report. So the headline picture this year is one of improvements in the performance of a number of our traded services as a result of significant change programmes that have taken place over the past 12 months. Most notable in this is a £0.8 million improvement in 12 months in the position within school food, with further improvement to come this year. And the paper sets out in some detail the actions that we've undertaken within the school food service. Our cafes have also both generated a healthy contribution this year compared to previous years, and we've also begun the process of outsourcing the cafes to new tenants, which was something that Scrutiny Commission had discussed in the past. Performance in our traded property services remains really strong, buoyed by a good external pipeline of works and also restructures as part of change programmes within those services to generate efficiencies. Areas of particular focus for the teams over the coming year remain school food, because there's still a great deal of work to be done there, but also Bow Manor, where the income targets continue to be delivered. Over 26,000 children were able to enjoy outdoor education sessions at Bow Manor this year, but rising costs have been particularly difficult on that site and have continued to erode the margins. The relocation of the Register Office from Loughborough presents a number of opportunities for the service at Bow Manor, although, as we noted to the Commission in January, these will take some time to come through, and we're working on developing those. We've also invested in our business development resource and social media marketing to bolster our work at Bow Manor, and we're starting to see some fruit from that. We're also focusing a lot on the school financial service, LEMIS and people services, which are areas of focus as shifting demands from schools, coupled with a challenging financial outlook for them, mean that we need to continue to reform our offer there to retain customers in these areas. So, Mr. Chairman, I think these are the main areas I draw to the committee's attention, but we've aimed in each section of the report to really clearly set out both performance in 2023, expected contribution in 2024-25, and the activity that's gone in between the two.
Thank you, Richard. Mr. Moore.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Richard, for the report. I've got a couple of questions. The first one on the school meal service, and I was just looking in the report to actually see if it provided any detail, but do you know roughly how many school meals in a year are being provided by the school meal service? Because it just gives us an idea in that case of that. I mean, if it's 1.9 million school meals, then we're the service is currently losing 1.9 million, and obviously that there's a correlation of different numbers. So that would be the first question. I just wondered if you knew how many school meals are actually being provided.
So we tend to measure it per day. So at the moment we're looking at it's about 21 to 25,000 meals a day over 190 days in the year.
So we can do the maths on that. That's useful, and I won't try and do the maths in my head now, but I will do it in a bit. Thank you. And the second question relates to Bow Manor, in particular the Registrar's Office. Obviously, during COVID, it was possible to register deaths and births, etc., I think online rather than actually in person because of the requirements. Has that continued, or is everything now back to being 100% in person?
I'm not going to lie, I'm not 100% certain on that because that's operated through another department of the council. My understanding, I believe, is that it's in person, but I'm afraid I can't give you a categorical answer on that one.
Okay, because I have had a couple of residents contact me, particularly in relation about registering deaths, because Bow Manor is obviously not particularly accessible by public transport, and particularly even the bus route that actually occasionally goes past Bow Manor, there's still best part of a quarter of a mile walk down the driveway to actually get to the building itself. So how have we had any feedback since the move on accessibility for residents to actually get to Bow Manor for registering if everything has to still be done in person?
I think probably best on this one is we'll pass this one on to the registration service and we'll get them to liaise with you directly on that. And yeah,
I think it was to go back to the Scrutiny Commission, I think, rather than just me personally, that would be useful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Mrs. Page.
Yes, thank you very much for a very comprehensive report, and I know a lot of effort and resources have gone not only into the report but into the issues since we've had some very challenging discussions. But there have been some positive movements which you identified in the report. However, I think going forward there are still quite a lot of issues that need addressing, and I think that is the general feeling. And I was wondering, rather than sitting here, whether we could be looking at another workshop where we can work it all through, preferably before the budget. I mean, any suggestion from you and Declan, because I think members probably would very much like another little workshop sort of in-house. Any?
No, if members found it useful, happy to do another one. If members just give us an indication whether they want it the same as last time, which was a broad look across all service, or whether they want to narrow down and focus on a smaller number, we're happy to do it either way.
Is there a consensus for that? We can. Mr. Hunt, did you want to come in?
I just wondered, Chair, if we could book somewhere for an away day. I mean, Bow Manor Hall.
I don't think we've got the resources for that, but it's a lovely idea.
No, I realise that.
We normally, Max, do it in-house. We sit and thrash it out between us. So do you want all of the issues? Yeah.
Is that everyone happy with that? Yeah. If you want to arrange that, that's great.
Thank you.
Any more questions, comments on this item from anybody? No. Mr. Brecken, did you want to?
I think just to answer the question on registering a death, I mean, on our website, it is contact to make an appointment to one of our Leicestershire registration officers. They obviously still use the Tell Us Once service when you go there. They'll recommend that's the way to do it. But at the moment, it looks like the online has been removed since sort of COVID. But I think Jane's going to take away an action, just have a look at them.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything to add? Everything. Okay, so thank you very much to everyone.
So just
sorry,
it's 3.8 million meals a year. So, yeah.
Right, thank you. That brings us on to item 11, which is the Corporate Asset Management Plan 2022 to 2026. The Annual Performance and Strategy Update 2023-2024. Lucy Littlefair, Assistant Director of Corporate Resources, is presenting this item, supported by Andrew Winnington. The relevant paperwork is on pages 33 to 74 of your reports. So over to you, Lucy.
Relative newness in a month in post, so I may need to refer to Andrew. Yeah, and just in terms of any of the questions and related to the performance from last year as one of our kind of senior officers in property. So the report details the performance achieved across both our strategic property service and our operational property service, and the asset management plan for 2023-2024, and you'll see that there's an actual report that's appended to the kind of overview report. Section 8 clearly sets out what the ambitions, I'm going to call it the CAMP, Corporate Asset Management Plan, for ease during this, and also confirms that whilst that's a 4-year plan, it's actually subject to kind of an annual review each year to make sure that it remains relevant and those objectives clearly aligned with the council's strategic objectives. Why do we do it? Really to be able to provide that kind of transparency and so that we're able to kind of demonstrate that value for money is ultimately being achieved in the management of all of the council's assets. So lots of high level figures within the report in terms of the number of assets and the value of those at 728 assets with a value of 507, and the fact that that's reduced by 3 over that 12-month period, and that was just due to the number of disposals and number of purchases, meaning that ultimately it resulted in a reduction. And that and it details really around the fact that value of the assets at the 507 million, that's increased by 38 million pounds on the previous year, and that's due to the way that new SIPFA guidance, that the evaluation of our rural estate has now been done. That is subject to external auditors, which will be happening in the autumn. But as it stands at the moment, there's an increase of the 38 million pound. Talks about our non-operational assets, what they are, and also the delivery of the capital programme, which is got the allocated 447 million pounds within the MTFS, and importantly that the projects, 61% of those projects within the capital programme have a property input within that. And then also around our future liabilities, particularly around the essential maintenance, repair and improvements of those assets. The report also details our performance against the plan in relation to our capital programme projects, the various different reviews of our properties and our strategies, some of our business as usual functions, and the programmes that we'd set ourselves out to achieve at the start of the year. And then a number of different key performance indicators that we use within the CAMP. And overall, the performance being that only that 50%, so that's 24 of those performance indicators, were achieved. 8% weren't achieved, but actually showed some significant improvements on the previous year, with 10, which does kind of equate to 42%, where we failed to achieve. But what we've done is we've highlighted the reasons for that underperformance, with 6 of them being related to kind of higher inflation in the construction industry, 3 related to, again, inflation within energy, and then 1 of them just due to a lack of a current benchmark, but with the current performance noted. And then there's also the information around our asset challenge, which for last year was to do with our operational and non-operational property with Charnwood and North West Leicestershire. And there's an appendix specifically where it details the outcomes of that. So overall performance demonstrates that the council does manage its assets well and importantly supports the delivery of the council's services and strategic objectives.
Thank you, Lucy. There's Mr. Morgan.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much for the report. And I have to say it's a very accessible report, which is really, really good, graphically, but also content-wise. So thank you very much for that. Can I ask, the farms that we obviously have and have had for a significant period of time, do we know roughly the sort of range of size of those farms in acreage terms? Because obviously farming is one of those sectors that over the years has become less easy to manage on smaller farm holdings, and the profitable farms tend to be larger and larger and larger. And I just wondered how big the on average the farms are that we currently have in our portfolio.
At the present time, the range is from, these are the ones that are fully equipped, that have got house buildings and land, range from 46 acres upwards to approximately 180. Most of them are in the range of around 100 acres, there being roughly 70 holdings on just over 7,000 acres.
So in terms of they are probably on the smaller side. Yeah, very, very small.
Yes, although they do provide, or the bulk of them provide, full-time viable business for somebody starting out in agriculture. They are still the only way into agriculture if you don't have a family that already owns substantial land. A number of them support themselves with additional enterprises off-site, some diversify on-site. So largely they are self-sufficient and they are remaining viable, or the bulk of them are anyway.
Okay, Mr. Frisbee. Thank you, Andrew. Coming from a rural area, could you, are they generally, is it arable, is it dairy, is it mixed, or is it recreational farming? What would you say the greater bias is, if there is indeed one?
The bulk of them are livestock. Traditionally, there used to be a majority of dairy farmers. That has now decreased in proportion, but that has been taken over by mixed livestock largely. They aren't really big enough for arable farms, although some of them obviously do grow some arable crops to support the livestock enterprise.
Mrs. Page.
Thank you. Do I understand the audit report is due in the autumn? So did you just refer to the audit report of the farms? Yeah. And if you're going to answer that, Declan, I assume the audit report will be circulated, and then, you know, we can take it from there, look at it and see if there's anything that Scrutiny might want to raise. Over to you, Dick.
So this is just the standard external audit from Grant Thornton that looks at the council's accounts. The element Lucy pulled out is because we've got new valuers this year, and they've doubled the value of the farm estate. So that's, I don't know, it's going to end up as one of those different values of different opinions. So that's the point about the external audit. Will look through it. So the accounts will, as you say, will get published. There'll be recommendations in there about whether our auditors agreed with the valuations, and it will go through the corporate governance committee route.
Any other members have any questions, comments on this item? No, anything to add? No, okay. Well, thank you, Lucy and Andrew, and Declan and Mr. Beckham.
Right there today.
So that brings us on to item 12, which is the date of the next meeting. The next meeting of the Commission is scheduled to take place on the 6th of November 2024 at 10 a.m. Number 13 item, urgent items. As stated at the start of the meeting, there are no urgent items, which brings us on to item 14, exclusion of the press and public. The next items is to be considered in private. I therefore move that under Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting during consideration of the following item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 3 and 10 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. Is that agreed? Okay, yes, thank you.